I'm Julie from Fabric Garden Cold Shop in Sacramento, and we are up to month 3 of our Vintage Rose block of the month. So I just want to go over a few things with you this month and give you a couple of tips. When I first glanced at the pattern, the picture at the bottom of the page shows half square triangles and cat's cradle. And I thought, oh great, I can use my specialty rulers to make these. But you can't, because when you read the directions, the half square triangles uncut, the uncut finish size is 2 7/8 inches. And the rulers don't do that measurement, and the cat's cradle is also 2 7/8. So I'm just gonna quickly go over making those half square triangles. So the pattern has you cut a square at 3 1/4. If you cut your squares at 3 1/4 and you draw your line on the diagonal and you sew on either side of the line and you cut it apart and you press it, all you will have to do in theory is trim off the dog ears. That is provided your cutting is accurate and your sewing is accurate and your pressing is accurate. Mine is not always. So rather than cutting it 3 1/4, I smudged it up to 3 3/8. You can also go 3 1/2, but you don't really have to go that much. So I'm just going to show you both of these squares were cut 3 1/8. So if you have a ruler with a 45-degree angle on it, all you need to do is line that 45-degree, let's get that pin out of the way, line that 45-degree line on your seam line. This should finish at 2 7/8. My line over here, my seam is pretty close, so I've lined that up. And then you can take your rotary cutter and just trim off that excess. And you have to cut opposite sides. You flip it around, you're gonna do the same thing. You're gonna put your 45-degree line on your seam line, and then the 2 7/8 mark is here. And if you're not used to using those odd measurements, sometimes you can just put a piece of tape on your mark. So this is 2 7/8. So I've got my seam on the line, and I've got my 2 7/8 on my outer edge that I just trimmed. And I'm gonna trim that side off. Oops. And then I'm gonna flip it around, and you have to do the same thing on the other two sides. So on the top, that was my straight line, and on the bottom, that was my straight line. So there's my 2 7/8. And there we go. So I'll trim that off, and you're gonna flip it around and you do the exact same thing on the other side, and you should end up with a half square triangle that is 2 7/8. So that's what I did for my half square triangles, and I made them all that way. The other tip I want to give, and I should have given this to begin with, if you are going to cut everything out all at once, please make sure you label everything, because some of these squares are the same cut size, but they have different letters. So you want to label everything. So for the cat's cradle, you do have to make it, you have to cut everything just like the directions say. So you've got your square for the top, you've got your little triangles, and you just be careful how you sew them on. So one goes this way, you're going to stitch your 1/4 inch seam. This one is going to go that way, so you end up with a triangle, which will, oh, I had one. Here it is. So once you've sewn it together, it will look like this, and then all you need to do is nip off those dog ears. And then you have your other triangle, which I did have at one time. There it is. And that's going to sew this way. When you flip it over and you stitch, I like to stitch from this side so that, I'm sorry, you can't really see because of I used matching thread. But when you want your seam line to go pretty much right through that X or just above it. And then you're going to press it open and trim off your dog ears, and your cat's cradle should also be 2 7/8 inches. So you need to make 4 of these in green, and then in the rows, you need to make 8 of them. So then the next step that you will be doing is this piece right here. And you've got your cat's cradle, your half square triangle, and then these 2 pieces here. Make sure that these are sewn in the correct orientation. So you've got your, I think this is Y seam, and then this one's W. You're going to sew them together. Oh, that's not W. Sorry. Anyway, they get sewn like that so that they will end up looking like this. This seam is pressed to the dark. This seam I pressed to the smaller one. And so when you sew them together, those two seams are going to nest. And then do press those seams open when you're done, because there are a lot of seams that are going to come together in this block. And pressed open, they will lay much flatter. So that's the step one. This is step two. You've got your half square triangle. This is the X triangle, which you sew on first. And then here's your Y and W. And that's where I said make sure you pay attention to the orientation of which triangle goes where, because it's the opposite of the one you just did. And then the third part is another half square triangle with your Z triangle sewn on either side, just like that, and you press them, and then you're gonna sew this one, and this one, and this one, and it will end up looking, looking like this one here. So that's what it's gonna look like. The next part is, oh, and the other thing I wanted to say is this one here, you only need for the green. I take that here, this one, you only need for the green, okay? This is the second step of the green triangle. You've got that one, and then you have this part here, which is another half square triangle, and the X and the W, which is this one here, that will go like that. And then you've got another Z triangle. So this one is the same, you just don't have the cat's cradle block here, okay? So that will end up looking like this when you've got it all sewn together, okay? You only need to make 4 of these in the green. You do not need to make them in the rose. So once you get your blocks made, you'll have, you've got your cat's cradle in green, and you've got your cat's cradle in rose. And then again, pay attention to the orientation of which way you sew them. And then once you sew that, and then you've got your second row, which is a cat's cradle in the rose. And then this is the other green triangle that you made, or square that you made. Sew those together in the 2 rows, and I did press everything open, so it will lay, it's been folded up in my box, but it will lay flatter once you get it done. And this month it did take a little more thinking, so just take your time, and as always, if you have any problems or questions, feel free to give us a call or come in the shop. Thank you very much. I'll see you next month.